Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a slow, quiet stroll through a medieval village. The kind where the rooftops sag a little, the air smells like damp earth, and the only thing louder than the roosters is the clatter of a cart's wooden wheels on the muddy road. It's a simple world, but not an easy one. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love hearing where you're all tuning in from, whether you're drifting off at midnight or sneaking in a little history during your lunch break. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sky's just starting to lighten over the village, a thin pink blush at the horizon, where the dark of night is fading into a soft cloudy grey. You can hear the distant rustle of thatch as someone shifts inside, stirring from a restless sleep. A rooster crows, sharp, loud, as if he's got something very important to say. A few moments later, another answers from across the fields. It's not exactly a symphony, but it's enough to tell you the village is waking up. The air is cold, really cold, the kind that makes your breath hang in little puffs and your fingers stiffen the moment you step outside. The ground is slick with frost, the mud from yesterday's rain frozen in rutted tracks that will thaw into muck by midday. A woman steps out of her cottage, pulling her shawl tight around her shoulders. Her dress is simple, rough-spun wool patched at the elbows, a little frayed at the hem. She glances up at the sky, squinting at the pale light, then down at the ground where her boots crunch on the stiff, frozen grass. A dog trots past her, tail wagging, nose to the ground. Chickens scratch at the dirt, feathers fluffed against the cold, while a thin wisp of smoke curls from the hole in the roof where last night's fire smoulders on. The village is small, maybe 50 people, maybe 100, depending on the season, the harvest, and whether the last winter was hard. The houses are built of wattle and daub, sticks woven together and covered with mud, sometimes reinforced with straw. They look like they'd blow over in a strong wind, but somehow they stand. Inside, it's dark. A single room shared by everyone. Parents, children, maybe a grandparent if they're still around. The fire smokes more than it warms, the air heavy with soot and the smell of damp wood. A few pieces of furniture, rough benches, a table, a chest that holds everything valuable they own, which isn't much. A child coughs in the corner, rubbing their eyes as they huddle closer to the fire. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof, so the smoke drifts low, making your eyes sting. The floor is packed, maybe covered in rushes if they've been changed recently, which, let's be honest, they probably haven't. Outside, the world is starting to move. A cart creaks down the track, pulled by an ox so slow you wonder if it's moving at all. The driver, bundled in a cloak, looks half asleep, his breath misting in the cold air. A man lifts a bucket from the village well, water sloshing as he carries it back to his home. Another splits wood with slow, practiced swings, the axe blade biting into the log with a dull thunk. Somewhere nearby, the blacksmith's forge is beginning to crackle to life, a glow flickering behind the half-open door. This is how the day starts, slowly, with a rhythm that's more about survival than ambition. There are no clocks here, no alarms, no timetables. The sun rises, the village wakes. The sun sets, the village sleeps. Historians still argue whether life in a medieval village was a peaceful, communal existence, or just a quiet kind of misery. Some say it was close-knit, everyone knowing each other's names, sharing what little they had. Others point to the hunger, the sickness, the constant grind of work, and say it was barely living at all. Honestly, it was probably a bit of both. So, as the first rays of sunlight stretch over the fields, glinting off the frost, let's take a slow breath. Let's feel the air, damp and cold in our lungs. Let's hear the faint clatter of a pot being set on the hearth, the soft footsteps of someone carrying a basket of feed for the chickens. The village is waking up, the day is beginning, and there's a long, long list of work waiting to be done. Let's keep walking. The village has stretched itself awake, and now the sounds of morning fill the air like a quiet, living symphony. You hear the low cluck of hens, the bray of a donkey from the far field, and the steady rhythm of a hammer. Somewhere, someone's already at work. The air smells different now, less of cold damp earth, more of smoke and cooking fires. A faint scent of baking bread drifts from a cottage window, mingling with the sharper tang of wet wool and the faint, unmistakable whiff of manure. It's not exactly the smell of fresh laundry and coffee, but for a medieval villager, this is just home. A group of women walks down the path, baskets balanced on their hips, heads wrapped in simple kerchiefs. They're laughing quietly, not because life is easy, but because, well, sometimes you have to laugh or you'll just sit down in the mud and cry. Their feet squelch in the muck, skirts damp at the hem, shoes worn thin from years of wear. They pass the well, where a young boy is struggling to haul up a heavy bucket, and one of the women pauses to ruffle his hair before moving on. This is the heart of the village, the shared spaces. The well, the central square, the church. Small, probably just a stone building with a wooden door and a bell that's been patched up more than once. These places aren't just for chores, they're for news, for gossip, for watching who's doing what. You see an old man leaning on a stick, eyes narrowed as he watches the women walk by. Maybe he's remembering his younger days, or maybe he's just wondering if there'll be enough ale at the tavern tonight. A few kids dart through the square, chasing each other with sticks, their laughter bright in the chilly air. Their bare feet slap against the cold ground, kicking up little sprays of mud. You wonder if they'll regret that later when the frost creeps back in. The blacksmith's forge cracks louder now, the bellows huffing as the coals glow red and gold. The blacksmith, apron soot-stained, sleeves rolled up, lifts his hammer and brings it down in a steady, almost hypnotic rhythm. Sparks fly and the air smells of hot iron and sweat. Nearby, a thatcher is perched on a roof, his legs dangling over the edge as he weaves bundles of straw into the thatch. His hands move with practiced ease, tying, tucking, trimming. His face is weathered, skin darkened by sun and wind, eyes squinting in the pale morning light. A few geese waddle by, honking their complaints at the world. A woman shoos them away with a sharp clap of her hands and mutters something under her breath. Probably not very polite. The sounds blend together, the soft chatter of voices, the scrape of a broom across a doorstep, the clink of a pail set down beside a cow waiting to be milked. Life here moves to a rhythm all its own. It's not fast, it's not efficient, but it's steady, dependable in its own quiet way. Historians still argue whether these villages were idyllic, peaceful places, or if they were just small islands of survival in a harsh and unforgiving world. But when you stand here, listening to the sounds of life, feeling the crisp air on your skin, it's hard not to feel like there's something simple, something human in it all. And yet, you know it's not easy. The work is just beginning. Soon the fields will fill with people, each tending to their patch of land. Children will carry water, gather firewood, and try not to get in the way. The sun will climb higher, and the day's chores will stretch ahead like an endless list. Feed the animals, mend the fences, patch the roof, gather herbs for the stew. The smell of bread thickens in the air now, dense, rough loaves, baked in a communal oven, the kind of bread that fills your stomach but leaves you chewing for a while. Someone will carry it home in a cloth, careful not to drop it in the mud, and it'll be shared among the family later, maybe dipped in a thin broth or eaten plain. The air hums with quiet effort, a life where nothing is guaranteed but everything is earned. The sun climbs, the village shifts, and the day rolls on. Let's keep walking. The fields stretch out beyond the village, a patchwork of muddy earth, stubbled stumps from last season's harvest, and the occasional stubborn green shoot poking through. This is where most of the village's life is spent. Right here, in the dirt, hands in the soil, under a sky that's more grey than blue, more clouds than sun. A man stoops low, his back already aching, pulling stones from the ground, tossing them into a pile that seems to grow faster than the crops ever will. Beside him, a young boy, maybe 8, maybe 9, works with a smaller basket, picking up clods of dirt, mimicking his father's movements without fully understanding why. The chickens, at least, seem to be enjoying themselves, scratching through the furrows for bugs, clucking as if they were in charge of the whole operation. The fields are divided into long, narrow strips, each family working their own patch, but side by side with their neighbours. It's called the open field system, and it's been this way for generations. Everyone knows where their strip begins and ends, even if the lines are invisible. It's a system built on cooperation, but also quiet competition, because if your strip doesn't yield enough, well, that's on you. There's no fertiliser here, not really. Just manure from the animals spread thinly, turned into the soil by hand. If it's been a good year, the harvest will be enough to last through the winter. If not, well, let's not think about if not. A woman kneels in the field, her skirts hiked up to keep them from dragging in the mud, her fingers quick as she weeds between the rows. Her hands are rough, her nails worn to the quick, dirt ingrained in the lines of her palms. She hums softly to herself, a little tune passed down from her mother maybe. The wind tugs at her hair, loosening wisps from under her kerchief. There's a rhythm to this work. Bend, pull, toss the weed aside, move to the next row. The sun climbs higher, the air warms just a little. A crow calls from a nearby tree, its voice harsh and scratchy, like it's laughing at the people below, which, let's be honest, maybe it is. The oxen plod along, pulling a heavy wooden plough through the thick soil, their breath steaming in the chilly air. The man guiding them mutters under his breath, one hand on the plough handle, the other holding a switch he rarely uses but keeps, just in case. The plough creaks, the earth parts, and the scent of fresh soil rises up, rich and dark. It's not glamorous work, it's not the stuff of heroic ballads or epic tales, but it's everything. If the fields fail, the village fails. If the harvest is poor, the winter will be lean enough that some may not make it to spring. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were endlessly trapped by the land, bound to an endless cycle of planting, reaping and surviving, or whether they found moments of peace, of pride, even of joy in the small victories, a basket full of beans, a row of wheat standing tall, a child learning to sow seed with careful little hands. Probably it was both. The seasons ruled everything here. You planted when the weather allowed, prayed for rain but not too much, and hoped the frost wouldn't come too soon. Superstitions crept in, old stories about spirits in the fields, charms for good harvests, whispered prayers at the edge of the plough, and let's not forget the taxes. After all the work, the Lord still takes his cut, the church asks for a tithe, and you're left hoping there's enough left over for your own family. A dog barks in the distance, sharp and sudden, breaking the stillness. The ploughman pauses, wipes his brow with the back of his hand, then sets his shoulders and keeps going. The sun is higher now. The frost has melted into mud. The crows still watch, waiting for whatever scraps the earth might give up. The fields stretch on. The work continues. And in this quiet, steady world of soil and sweat, there's a strange kind of peace, hard-won, fleeting but real. Let's keep walking. The village cottages cluster together in a loose ring, their shapes uneven, like they've sagged under the weight of too many seasons. Wattle and daub walls patched and repatched, thatch roofs curling at the edges, smoke drifting lazily from holes where the wind sneaks in more than it should. Step inside, and it's dark. The only light comes from the fire, a small smoky thing, smouldering low in the centre of the room. The air is heavy, thick with soot, the scent of damp straw, and the sharp tang of wood smoke. The walls feel close, they lean in. Uneven beams overhead, soot blackened and creaking softly in the wind. The floor is hard-packed earth, maybe a scattering of rushes to soften it a bit, though they're long overdue for changing. A chicken might cluck softly from a corner, pecking at stray crumbs. A rough wooden table stands in the centre, scarred with knife marks stained dark from years of use. There are a few benches, a small chest tucked against the wall, a few tools hanging from pegs, simple, useful things, a knife, a ladle, a spindle. The family sleeps together here, no separate bedrooms, no privacy. A mattress of straw on the floor shared by parents, children, maybe even a grandparent if they're still around. The warmth of bodies, the crackle of the fire, the occasional sharp cough cutting through the night. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof where the smoke escapes, curling out into the sky. The soot settles on everything. Walls, ceiling, clothes, skin. It's inescapable. The hearth is the heart of the home. Meals are cooked over the flames. Simple meals. A thin pottage of grains and beans, maybe with a scrap of meat if they're lucky. A hunk of coarse bread, torn into pieces and dipped in the broth. It's not exactly a feast, but it fills the belly. A woman stirs the pot, the wooden spoon moving slowly through the bubbling liquid, the smell rising, earthy and faintly bitter. A child sits nearby, weaving straw into rough mats. Fingers nimble, lips pressed together in concentration. The air is full of little sounds. The crackle of the fire, the quiet scrape of the spoon, the soft murmur of voices as they talk about the day's work, the weather, the neighbour's stubborn ox. The outside world feels far away in here. There's no glass in the windows, just shutters that close against the wind, rattling when it blows too hard. Rain sometimes drips through the roof, a slow, steady tap that no one bothers to fix because there's always something more urgent to do. Historians still argue whether these homes were cramped and miserable, or if they were simply practical. Warm enough, familiar. A space where families lived close, sometimes too close, but together. The truth, it's probably a bit of both. The house isn't a castle. It's not even a proper cottage by modern standards, but it's shelter. It's warmth when the wind howls outside. It's a place to sleep, to eat, to raise children, to patch clothes by firelight, to tell stories when the day's work is done. And when the fire burns low and the children are tucked in, someone might pick up a spindle or mend a torn garment or just sit, staring into the embers, lost in thought. The roof groans softly in the wind, the fire flickers, a baby stirs in their sleep, and the day drifts quietly toward night. Let's step outside again, feel the cool air, the scent of damp thatch, the faint sounds of the village still awake, just a little, before the dark settles in fully. The morning moves on, and the chores begin. Everywhere you look, someone's doing something. A man chopping wood, the blade biting into the log with a soft thunk. Thunk. Thunk! A woman kneeling in the dirt, hands deep in a bucket, scrubbing clothes by the cold water of the stream, her sleeves soaked, fingers red from the chill. Children gather sticks, the smallest ones barely able to carry their bundles, stumbling a little, giggling when they trip over their own feet. It's endless, this work. The to-do list that never really ends. Fetch water, mend the fence, feed the pigs, sweep the hearth, patch the roof. And when you're done with that, you start over again. The water must be carried from the well, sloshing in heavy wooden buckets that dig into your hands. The firewood must be chopped and stacked, or there'll be no warm food tonight, no heat when the cold creeps in. And don't even think about leaving the gate unlatched, unless you want the neighbour's goat in your garden. Again. A man hauls a sack of grain over his shoulder, the weight bending him low, his boots squelching in the mud. His breath comes in soft puffs, clouding in the cold air. A woman nearby kneads dough, her hands working the sticky mass with practised ease, her fingers pressing, folding, turning, over and over again. The children, when they aren't fetching wood or chasing geese, play in the dirt, a simple game. Stones laid out in a circle, a small stick for a toy sword, their imaginations filling in the rest. There's a rhythm to it all, an unspoken flow that everyone understands. When the sun is high, it's time to eat, if there's food. A simple meal, maybe some pottage left over from the night before, maybe a slice of coarse bread, a little cheese if they're lucky. No plates, just rough bowls and hands. A dog sniffs around the edges, hopeful for a scrap. Chickens peck at crumbs in the dust. A baby fusses quietly, and someone hums a lullaby under their breath. A tune older than anyone can remember. The air smells of smoke. damp wool, warm bread if the oven's been kind today. There's no break from the work. Not really. Even while eating, someone's mind is on the next task. Mending a torn tunic, patching a leaking thatch, gathering herbs for the stew. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were trapped in an endless cycle of labour, or if they found moments of contentment in the small tasks, the quiet victories. Maybe it's both. Maybe it depends on the day, or the season, or the weather. Or maybe it depends on whether the chickens behaved this morning. The afternoon stretches ahead, and the work continues. A boy leads a cow along the path, the bell around its neck clinking softly with each step. A woman leans on her broom, watching a pot simmer over the fire, the steam curling up into the smoke-darkened rafters. The sky shifts, clouds drifting, the light fading a little, but there's still so much to do. A rooster flaps its wings, strutting through the yard as if it owns the place. A dog barks once, sharp and sudden, then settles back down. Life here is quiet, in a way, but it's never still. Let's keep walking. There's more to see. Every person in the village has a role to play. It's not written down anywhere, but everyone knows where they fit. The blacksmith, his forge crackling, hammer striking iron in slow, steady rhythm. Sparks jump into the air, his sleeves rolled up, face streaked with soot, sweat glistening in the firelight. His hands are strong, the kind of strong that only comes from years of shaping metal, bending it to your will, or at least trying. Across the path, the carpenter is busy too, his mallet tapping gently as he shapes a rough beam into a smoother plank. The scent of fresh wood drifts in the air, sharp, almost sweet. His tools are simple, a chisel, a plane, a saw. But in the right hands they can build a door, a wheel, a stool that wobbles only slightly. The alewife. She's brewing in the corner, stirring a bubbling pot that smells, well, a bit like damp bread and sour apples. Her sleeves are rolled, her hair tied back, and she moves with a kind of practised ease, as if she could stir that pot blindfolded if she had to. The baker. He's been up since long before dawn, kneading dough, stoking the oven, lifting loaves that crackle and split as they cool. The air around his shop smells warm, rich, the kind of smell that makes you stop for just a moment and breathe it in, even if you can't afford a loaf today. There's the thatcher, up on a roof, weaving bundles of straw into place, the midwife, the miller, the shepherd who walks the fields in slow, endless loops, counting sheep with a patient gaze. And then there's the Lord's Reeve, the one who keeps an eye on the fields, the grain stores, the taxes, making sure everyone's doing their part. He's not exactly popular, but he's part of the system too. It's a web, woven tight. Everyone has a place, a task, a role to fill. Even the children, though small, have their jobs. They tend geese, chase birds from the fields, fetch water, help wherever they can. The smallest ones. They play at chores, mimicking the grown-ups, their giggles mixing with the sound of a cart rattling by. And the old folks. They sit on benches in the sun when it's warm enough, or near the hearth when it's not, watching, nodding, remembering, and maybe offering a bit of unsolicited advice, because some things never change. The village is like a living thing, each part depending on the others. If the blacksmith's tools break, the carpenter can't mend his cart. If the baker's oven fails, the village goes without bread. If the alewife's brew turns sour, well, there'll be a few grumbles at the next feast. Historians still argue whether this system was a form of quiet, simple harmony, or just a necessary grind to keep people fed and fields planted. Probably a little of both. It's not perfect, it never was, but in a world without clocks, without electricity, without supermarkets or supply chains, this web of roles and tasks is what keeps the village alive. And as the day moves forward, the rhythm continues. The hammer rings, the loom creaks, the fire crackles, and life in the village hums on, slow, steady, and utterly dependent on every pair of hands. Let's walk a little further, see what's cooking for dinner. If you were to peek into a medieval kitchen, or, well, the corner of the room that is the kitchen, you wouldn't see much. No ovens, no stoves, no fancy countertops, just a fire in the hearth, a heavy pot suspended by an iron hook, and the faint, steady aroma of something bubbling slowly. It's dinner time, though they wouldn't call it that. Just the next meal, really, when the sun is sinking lower and the day's work has left everyone tired and hungry. What's on the table? Well, not much if we're being honest. Bread, mostly, coarse, dark, a little chewy, made from whatever grain they could manage to grow or barter for. Some pottage, a thick, lumpy stew of grains, maybe a few beans, maybe a bit of cabbage or onion if they had it, a turnip perhaps, diced small and stirred in, meat, rare, a scrap of bacon if they were lucky, a bone boiled down to add some flavour. No, you're not getting a roast chicken every night, unless you are the lord of the manor. There's ale too, not the strong fancy kind you might imagine, but a weak homemade brew, just enough to take the edge off the hunger, and let's be honest, safer to drink than the water. The family gathers close, sitting on low stools or the hard-packed floor, bowls in their hands, steam curling in the dim light. A child dips a crust of bread into the pottage, lifts it carefully, blows on it with a little puff of breath, before taking a small, cautious bite. The mother wipes her hands on her apron, her face lined, her eyes tired, but watching, always watching. There's no tablecloth here, no plates piled high, just the sound of quiet eating, the occasional clink of a spoon against a wooden bowl, the pop and hiss of the fire. It's a simple meal, a humble one, but in a world where hunger is always waiting in the shadows, it's enough for now. Historians still argue whether this diet, heavy on grains, light on variety, was a quiet kind of endurance, or a slow, steady struggle for survival. Honestly, probably a bit of both. Food was seasonal, always tied to the land, the weather, the harvest. Spring, a thin time, stored supplies running low, fields not yet ready to harvest. Summer, better, green things sprouting, berries ripening in the hedgerows. Autumn, a rush of work, harvesting, storing, salting what little meat they might have. Winter, hard, cold, dark and hungry. The stew gets thinner, the bread crusts harder, the meal's quieter. But tonight there's a pot on the fire, a crust of bread in each hand, and the faint flickering hope that maybe the harvest will be better next year, and maybe the ale will taste a bit stronger too. Outside the night deepens. A dog barks in the distance. The wind sighs through the thatch, and somewhere a baby stirs, letting out a soft, sleepy cry. The fire pops softly, embers glow, and the scent of wood smoke lingers in the air, wrapping around the family like a quiet, smoky blanket. Let's step outside, let the cool air hit our faces, and see what the night holds. Not every day in the village was just work and worry. No. Sometimes there was a little excitement, a little celebration, a chance to set down the tools and join in the noise and laughter. Market days, festivals, saints' feast days, they broke up the rhythm of the year, like small bright threads woven into a grey woolen cloth. Imagine it! The market square bustling with people, a jumble of carts and stalls, voices calling out, laughter rising above the clatter of hooves and the creak of wheels, a man shouting about his onions, another hawking ribbons and beads, a woman selling honeycomb, golden and sticky under the sun. The village isn't big, but when it's market day it feels alive. Children weave between the crowds, chasing each other, nearly tripping over baskets of apples, their faces smeared with crumbs from a sweet cake bought with a stolen coin. The smells drift together, roasted meat, fresh bread, the sharp tang of vinegar from the pickling stool. Someone's playing a pipe, a quick, lively tune, and for a moment the whole square seems to move in time with it. And then there are the fairs, the bigger celebrations, tied to the seasons or the saints. Midsummer, for example. Bonfires lit high on the hills, flames crackling into the sky, faces glowing in the light. Young couples sneak off into the fields, while the old folks watch, sipping ale and muttering about how they used to dance all night. Or harvest time, when the fields are gathered in, and the work is, at least for a moment, done. They might roast a pig if they're lucky, share loaves of bread baked with the new grain, drink the last of the cider. Someone brings out a drum, someone else a fiddle, and before long there's a circle of dancers, feet stomping, skirts swaying, laughter mixing with the music. It's not exactly a royal ball, but it's the best the village has. Historians still argue whether these festivals were a way to let off steam, a necessary relief from the grind of daily life, or if they were more like little reminders of the community itself, a way to stitch people together, even if the stitching was a bit frayed around the edges. Probably both, because when the days are hard and the work is endless, even a little joy matters. Not that it was all light and laughter. Fairs could get rowdy, fights would break out, someone might have a little too much ale, the reeve might have to step in and settle things with a stern word or a fine if it came to that, and sometimes a peddler would come through, selling trinkets, charms, maybe a tiny mirror, and for a coin or two you could hold it up and see your own face reflected back at you, small and warped, like a little piece of magic. The village didn't get many visitors, so when someone did show up it was an event, a travelling merchant, a tinker, maybe a wandering friar with a satchel of relics and a story for every mile he'd walked. The children would gather round, wide-eyed, listening as he spoke of places they'd never seen, of cities with stone walls and towers so tall they scraped the sky, of kings and queens, of battles and saints. And for a moment the village felt a little bigger, the world a little wider. Then the fire would burn low, the dancers would tire, the songs would fade, and the market square would empty, the carts rattling back down the lane, the laughter echoing softly in the dark. And the village would go back to its rhythm, its slow, steady heartbeat, waiting for the next small burst of joy to break through the grey. Let's move on. The bells are ringing in the distance, and there's more to see. The bells chime, slow, steady, their sound rising above the rooftops, drifting through the fields, a reminder that in this village, like in every medieval village, faith shapes the rhythm of life. The church stands at the heart of it all, a small building, stone walls rough under your hand, a wooden door worn smooth where generations have pushed it open. Inside, it smells of damp stone, old wood, melted wax, and something else. Something quiet and heavy, like the weight of 100 whispered prayers. The floor is uneven, worn by countless footsteps, boots scuffing the stone, skirts brushing the aisle, children fidgeting while their mothers hush them. The priest's voice rises, low, rhythmic, in Latin that most of the villagers don't fully understand, but they know when to bow their heads, when to kneel, when to cross themselves. They listen, not always to the words, but to the sound, the feeling of it, the sense that this, right here, is the centre of the world. Faith isn't just a Sunday thing, it's woven into everything. The fields are blessed before planting, prayers said for rain, for the harvest, for the health of the livestock. A charm might be buried at the corner of a field, a sprig of herbs hung above the door, a whispered plea to a saint for protection when the weather turns rough. Superstition, maybe, or maybe just hope, wrapped in tradition. Every life event, from birth to death, passes through the church. A baby is baptized, its name spoken aloud for the first time as holy water drips onto its forehead. A couple is wed, standing before the altar, hands trembling, maybe with love, maybe with nerves, maybe both, and when someone dies, the bell tolls, slow, solemn, the sound rolling out across the fields like a soft, heavy blanket. Historians still argue whether the church in a medieval village was a source of comfort, a tool of control, or simply a part of life, as unshakable as the changing seasons. Probably a bit of everything. The priest himself isn't a grand figure. No velvet robes or golden crosses here. He's a man like the others. A little better educated, maybe. A little more respected, sure. But his cottage is small, his meals are simple, and his hands are just as rough from tending his own patch of land. The church bells mark the hours, the holy days, the moments that stand out in a long stretch of work and worry. And when the sun is low, when the shadows stretch across the fields and the fire in the hearth burns down to coals, a family might pause, fold their hands, and say a quiet prayer for health, for food, for the simple hope that tomorrow will be kind. It's not about grand sermons or flashing miracles. It's the small, steady faith, the shared sense that there's something bigger than the mud, the cold, the hunger. A candle flickers on the altar, a hymn rises soft and slow, and the village breathes together in that quiet, ancient rhythm. Let's take a step back outside. The night is creeping in, and the village is settling down once more. Not every prayer is answered, not every hope fulfilled. Life in the village has its shadows, and when sickness creeps in, it doesn't knock on the door politely. It barges in, fast, unrelenting. A cough that lingers too long, a fever that won't break, a wound that turns red and hot. These are the dangers you fear, because in the village, there's no doctor waiting in a clean room with bright lights and polished tools. No, here, healing is a patchwork of herbs, whispers, and sometimes a little bit of desperate hope. The healer, maybe an old woman, her hands shaking slightly, her voice low, gathers what she can from the hedgerows. Yarrow, for bleeding. Chamomile, for fevers. A little mugwort tucked into a pouch just in case. And if the herbs don't work, well, there's always a prayer to Saint Sebastian, or a charm tied to the bedpost, or a whispered chant said 3 times over a bowl of water. Historians still argue whether medieval medicine was more faith than science, more ritual than remedy. Probably. A tangled mix of all of it. Leeches might be used to draw out the bad humours. A poultice of mashed onion might be smeared over a wound, or a paste of honey and herbs pressed into a cut, sticky and sharp smelling. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. And when the sickness runs through a family, it's like a storm no one can stop. The coughing, the moaning, the fevered whispers in the dark. A mother holding her child close, rocking gently, humming a lullaby through her tears, hoping the herbs will take, the fever will break, the breath will steady. The village does what it can, neighbours bringing a little broth, a few sticks for the fire, someone watching the other children while the family prays and waits. But the healer's tools are few, a mortar and pestle, a handful of herbs drying by the hearth. A small book of charms and remedies passed down like an old secret, and even if the sickness fades, it leaves its mark. A limp, a cough that never quite goes away, a hollow space at the table where someone used to sit. It's hard, it's brutal, but it's also part of life in the village, because when there's no doctor, no hospital, no safety net, you rely on each other, on old knowledge, on the hope that maybe, just maybe, the next sickness will pass you by. And if not, well, at least the ale helps. The fire crackles low, the air smells of herbs and smoke, and the quiet settles in again, heavy but familiar. This is the way it is. This is the way it's always been. Let's step outside for a breath of cold air. There's more to see, and the night is far from over. Outside, the sounds of the village quiet. The sky turning deep blue, shadows stretching long and thin. But for the children, the day isn't quite done yet. They're still there, darting between the cottages, their bare feet slapping against the packed earth, their laughter bubbling into the cold air like little sparks of warmth. A boy chases after a dog, a stick in his hand, pretending it's a sword, slashing at imaginary foes, his face fierce in the fading light. A girl crouches near a puddle, poking it with a stick, watching the ripples spread out, her fingers muddy, her dress smeared from a day of play. And if you listen closely, you'll hear the faint tune of a rhyme, passed down from older kids to younger, a jumble of nonsense words and half-remembered verses. Ring-a-ring-a roses, a pocket full of posies. The games are simple: a hoop rolled down the lane, a pile of stones turned into a castle, a doll made of rags, hugged tight. But playtime in the village isn't all fun and laughter. Children work. From the moment they can toddle, they have tasks: gathering firewood, fetching water, chasing birds from the fields, helping tend the animals. A child of 7 might already be expected to help with the harvest, to stir the pot, to mind the geese. Historians still argue whether medieval children were allowed a true childhood, or if they were just small adults in training, their lives shaped by work from the very start. Probably a little of both. They played, but they also worked. They giggled, but they also learned to carry burdens, to lift, to haul, to mend, and sometimes to stay very quiet when the grown-ups were arguing by the fire. In the evenings, after the last chores are done, you might see a child curled up by the hearth, eyes heavy, head resting on their mother's lap, listening to the low murmur of voices, half asleep before the story is finished. The stories, they're old, passed down from voices that are long gone, of heroes and saints, of foxes and wolves, of cautionary tales that make little ones shiver, even as they smile. The fire flickers low, a dog stretches with a soft sigh, a baby fusses, quieted by a gentle shush and a slow, steady rocking. The village breathes in, breathes out, the quiet stretching long into the night. And the children, they'll wake early tomorrow to play again, to work again, to chase geese, gather sticks, or stir the pot when their mother's hands are too busy. Life in the village is a cycle, turning, like a wheel that never quite stops. Let's take a quiet step back, leave the children to their games, and see what happens when rules are broken. The village might seem peaceful, quiet, but rules here matter, and when those rules are broken, well, there are consequences. Imagine it. A man caught stealing a chicken. Maybe it was hunger, maybe desperation, maybe just a moment of bad judgment. The reeve calls the villagers together, a small crowd gathering in the square. Faces turned toward the centre where the accused stands, head bowed, hands clenched tight. Justice here isn't fancy. No robes, no gavels, no lawyers arguing points of law. It's simpler and rougher. Stock stand in the square, rough-hewn wood, splintered and worn. A thief might spend a day or two locked in place, arms and head held tight, the sun beating down, flies buzzing, the occasional child daring to throw a clump of mud. It's not exactly a fair trial, but it's a clear message. For bigger crimes, the punishments get harsher. A poacher caught taking the Lord's deer might face a fine he can't pay, or worse. A repeat offender, someone accused of serious theft, might be branded, or even hanged at the gallows outside the village. Harsh, yes. But in a world where survival is fragile, rules are the thin threads holding it all together. Disputes over land, over debts, over insults. These are settled by the manor court, a gathering of villagers, the reeve, the priest, sometimes the Lord himself. They listen, they argue, they decide. Historians still argue whether these courts were fair, or if they were just a way for the powerful to stay powerful. Probably a bit of both. There are customs, strange little rules that everyone knows, but no one quite remembers where they came from. You owe a chicken to the Lord if your pig wanders onto his land. You must bring firewood to the mill on certain days. You can't gather wood from the forest without permission. And when someone dies, the best animal in their household goes to the Lord as a death duty. The family grieves, and the Lord gets a cow. It sounds harsh, and it is. But it's the system. The rules keep the village in line, keep the peace, most of the time. A boy with a scraped knee runs past, holding a bundle of sticks. His mother calls after him, scolding gently. reminding him to stay out of trouble, to mind his manners, to remember what happened to old Thomas when he tried to cheat the miller. Thomas learned his lesson, after a few days in the stocks and a very public apology. And so, the days roll on, a quiet kind of order maintained by a mix of custom, fear, and the knowledge that breaking the rules rarely ends well. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows over the square. The stock standing empty for now, but waiting, always waiting. Let's walk a little further toward the manor house on the hill, where the real power sits. The manor house looms on the hill, not grand by castle standards, but solid, sturdy. A place that says, quietly but firmly, this is where power lives. The walls are thick stone, the roof tiled instead of thatch, a flag, faded, frayed, fluttering gently in the breeze. Smoke curls from the chimneys, a softer, steadier plume than the cottage fires below. This is the Lord's domain. Down in the village, you live by his rules. Pay your taxes, give your share of the harvest. If he wants labourers for the harvest, you go. If he needs men for a hunt, you follow. If he calls for a gathering, you stand in the crowd, hat in hand, waiting for his word. And when it comes time to pay rent, or a fine, or that death duty, you pay. The Lord might not be a tyrant. He might even be fair in his way. But he's the one who owns the land. The fields you plough, the woods you gather firewood from, the pasture where your sheep graze. It's not yours, it's his. Historians still argue whether the Lord was a protector, a necessary figure in the fragile web of medieval life, or just the man who took his share and left the villagers to scrape by. Probably a bit of both. The manor itself is a world apart. The food is better, richer. Bread made from finer flour, meat more often on the table. The hall is large, with a long wooden table, carved chairs, a fire burning high in the hearth. There's talk of news from other towns, from the king's court, from wars far away that feel like stories from another world. The Lord has horses in the stable, maybe a small herd of cattle, a hawk or two for hunting. His family is better dressed, wool dyed deeper colours, cloaks trimmed with fur, boots that actually keep out the mud. But even here, life isn't easy. The manor house needs tending. The fields must still be worked. Taxes paid up the chain to the king. And when the harvest fails, or sickness sweeps through, or soldiers ride in demanding supplies, the Lord feels it too. Maybe not as sharply, but no one is untouched. In the evenings, the village looks up at the manor windows glowing faintly in the dark, a reminder that while the fields are theirs to work, they're not theirs to own. And when disputes arise, the Lord or his reeve settles them. Who owes what? Who can graze their sheep where? Who pays a fine for letting their dog run wild? The villagers grumble, sure, but they also know it's just how things are. The manor sits quiet, smoke drifting into the darkening sky, the faint sound of dogs barking, a horse whinnying softly, a world of power, sitting quietly, watching over the village below. Let's take a step back down the path. The day's not quite done, and the world is wider than this little village. The village may feel like the whole world, with its muddy paths and smoky hearths, but it doesn't live in isolation. Beyond the fields, beyond the forests, is a larger world, and sometimes that world comes knocking. A peddler might arrive, wheeling a cart full of buttons, ribbons, pots and pins, treasures that shimmer in the sun, even if they're just tin and cloth. Children gather around, wide-eyed, tugging at sleeves and pointing, hoping their parents might spare a coin for something bright and useless. The adults ask questions, where he's from, what the roads are like, what news he carries, because news is rare. Most people here don't read, and if they do, there's not much to read. Letters, if they come, are brought by hand and read aloud, slow and careful, like prayers. So when someone comes from beyond, with tales of towns and lords, of battles and markets, the village listens, even if half the stories are probably made up. Then there are the soldiers. They don't come often, but when they do, it's serious. A call for service, supplies, loyalty to the king. The clatter of hooves on the lane, the bright flash of armour dulled by dust, the way everyone steps back, lowers their eyes. They might stay a night, take some grain, drink the ale, leave early with a little thanks, and after they're gone the village watches the road, waits for the dust to settle, and hopes they don't come back soon. Trade routes pass nearby, sometimes. Strangers walking from market to market, pilgrims on the way to a distant shrine, monks gathering offerings for a monastery up the hill. Each one carries something with them, a new word, a strange item, an accent the villagers lean in to understand. It's exciting for a moment. Then the road stretches out again, and they're gone. Historians still argue whether medieval villages were truly isolated, or whether they were connected in more subtle, seasonal ways, through trade, travel, and the stories passed from mouth to mouth. Probably it's both. A village might not know what the king had for breakfast, but they'd hear if there was a war, a famine, a new tax, especially that last one. And when danger truly threatened, bandits, raiders, or even plague, the village would close in tight, lock the doors, stay off the roads, pray. The world beyond could bring goods, or it could bring fear, but it always kept turning, and even in a small corner of it, with muddy boots and calloused hands, you felt its pull. The sky darkens, a chill wind picks up across the fields, and someone looks to the road just to check, just to see if anything or anyone is coming. Let's head back toward the cottages, just in time for one last question. Was it really so bad? So, was it really that bad? Life in a medieval village. Hard, yes. Unforgiving. A rhythm of work, sleep, and more work. Hunger always close. Sickness lurking in the shadows. Rules tight as the laces on a pair of old boots. But still. There was laughter. A child's giggle while chasing a goose. The quiet chuckle of a woman sharing a joke at the well. A man's grin as he catches a fish from the stream, holding it up like a small scaly prize. There were moments of joy. A loaf of bread rising just right. A pot of stew simmering thick and fragrant on the hearth. A baby's first smile. A wedding in the spring with flowers tucked into hair and the sound of music carried on the breeze. Historians still argue whether medieval life was misery, or if it was simply life. Maybe it wasn't a world of suffering, but a world where people adapted. They laughed when they could. They danced when the work was done. They loved fiercely, because they knew loss could come quickly. A medieval villager might have envied us, with our warm homes, full shelves, soft beds, but they also might have pitied us. So far from the land, from the seasons, from the simple, harsh, beautiful rhythm of life close to the earth. They knew the names of the trees, the way the wind shifted before a storm, the sharp crack of frost in the morning air. Their lives were small, but they were also whole. A man might never travel far, but he knew every twist in the path, every call of the birds, every neighbour's voice. A woman might never hold a book, but she knew how to keep a family fed, a hearth warm, a garden growing. And sure, the bread might have been a little stale, and the ale a little thin, but they had each other. They shared what they had. They helped when someone fell ill. They gathered to mourn, to celebrate, to sing, to work. And maybe that's the lesson in all of it. Life wasn't easy, but it was theirs. So, was it really so bad? Not always, not every day, maybe just enough to get by. The village settles into night now. Fires dimming, doors closing, yes, the quiet stretching long and slow. A dog barks once, then is still. The wind whispers through the thatch, and the world, ancient, muddy, beautiful, turns on. Let's let the story rest here, and ease into sleep. And now, as the last embers fade, let's settle in. You've walked the muddy lanes, felt the damp air, watched the sun rise and set over fields that fed a village for generations. You've heard the laughter, the quiet conversations, the crackle of the fire. You've seen the children play, the blacksmith's hammer glow, the priest's voice echoes soft and low through the stone walls. The world of the medieval village is far behind us now, but its quiet rhythm still hums, a distant echo, a memory of simpler times, harder times, but not without their beauty. Let your breath slow. Feel the weight of the blankets, the soft hum of the fan, the quiet around you. There's no rush here, no list to finish, no clocks to chase, just the quiet sound of your own breath, the soft glow of a story lingering in your mind. Picture the fields at dawn, dew glistening, the first rays of sunlight slipping across the horizon. Feel the warmth of a small fire, the smell of wood smoke curling through the air, the soft, steady comfort of a world that keeps turning, day by day, season by season. Let that quiet fill you. Let it slow your thoughts. Let it carry you into rest. Sleep well, sweet dreams.